introduction.
So I'm Rachel Davis. I teach 6th grade science, and I'm the middle school science department chair.
And I'm Rochelle Savoy. I'm the middle school teaching and learning coordinator, so I'm kind of a little bit of everywhere. And I've, maybe also some context, I've been at ASD for 9 years, and I've had a variety of roles. I started in the high school, and I moved to the middle school, and I'm now an ASD parent, so kind of cover a lot of bases at ASD.
Yeah, and this is my 8th year here, I think.
Yeah. So, our goals today, and we did share with some of you that we probably could have taken away the name middle schoolers, because talking about learning comes at any phase of life. Even as adults, we learn, and these are things that we use when we're talking to our own peers. But we are going to talk a little bit about what learning looks like in the middle school specifically, and we're going to talk about learning in progress, and then we're going to talk about how to talk to your child about learning that's already ended, that's been assessed. So in process.
So we just thought if anyone could share, like, what's the hardest part about talking to your middle schooler about school? Like, what are the annoying responses you get? Like, you know, yeah, okay, fine.
Don't remember.
Yeah. Don't remember. Or you're like, what did you do today? Nothing.
Yeah. Any other obscure responses? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the final. Okay, one of the things one of the counselors taught me in elementary, because my kids are not talkers, is the 2 stars and a wish. And so that's just to get a little bit of insight, but it's not always about, you know, they don't always relate it to learning, but sometimes there'll be a little gem related to learning, like, oh, I really enjoyed this in social studies or something.
Nice. So that's something that you've tried to get beyond just that fine response being a really specific question. Yeah, we'll talk about some of those questions. Any other things that you've attempted to try, maybe not successfully, that have gotten you a little bit beyond the fine, or other things that are tricky?
I usually start talking about my day. That encourages. It's a great one.
We're gonna talk about that. So,
Yeah, that's a really great strategy. Yeah. And that 2 stars and a wish could be, you start off that, right, about your day as well. Yeah. I'll probably share a few anecdotes throughout, because a lot of this, like I said, as a teacher I saw a lot of this, but now as a parent I'm living it more, and sometimes the things that's the trickiest is sometimes the emotions that can be wrapped up in learning or in school, and so how to manage maybe when things don't go well, you might not get a lot of answers, but you might physically see a response or an emotional response, and how to manage that has also been something that hopefully we'll address. Any other last? Okay. So this is kind of middle school specific and high school specific as well. So if you have high schoolers, this will make sense too. There's 2 places that learning is communicated, right? First, we have Schoology, and that's where learning is in progress. That is where students are working on things day to day. That's where you'll see their assignments. That's where you'll probably often see communication between your student and the teacher with feedback. But this is the stuff ongoing, right? You have access to kind of the assignments that the students are seeing. You don't actually get to see their actual assignment. They still have to show you that, right? So that's where we'll talk a little bit about how do you talk about their learning in progress, because you'll see that an assignment's upcoming. You might see some assignment details, but you don't get to see their actual individual work unless they are open to sharing that with you. Did you want to add anything about Schoology? Because
yeah, and then
Schoology
and I also just said, like, depending on the class, like some classes have like notebooks and things like that. So some of the learning in progress, like not everything's on the computer. So you may be like, show me your, you know, ELA notebook, or what's going on in your science notebook, and that may give you a little bit more information as well.
How many of you have accessed Schoology? Okay, hopefully many of you have seen that. Most of you probably might live in the PowerSchool world, because that's our platform that communicates learning that has finished or that has been completed. And this is where you'll see grades. You'll also see comments in the form of feedback. Hopefully you've all seen that. We'll talk about some things we're doing in the middle school to continue to make that more visible. Sometimes PowerSchool can be, there's a lot of clicks sometimes to get the information that you may want to talk to your child about. So we're going to talk a bit about how to use PowerSchool as a platform to talk about learning. But again, the importance is that that's sort of learning that's happened. That doesn't mean you can't talk about it. It just might look differently about how you talk about learning at the end than what they're working on in process. Sometimes the last few years we've done a Talk Tuesday in the middle school about standards-based grading and learning. We're going to talk a bit about that. This year, I don't know how many of you were at the beginning of the year partnership with Mike and Susan looking at the handbook. We spent some time really revising the handbook, so we prioritized that this year. So we are going to kind of combine a bit today. One thing we did want to highlight is standards are assessed multiple times throughout the year. So anything that you see in Power School, students have multiple opportunities to demonstrate learning on. Any questions about the two platforms we use about learning? Okay. So like I said, I'm going to add a bit about kind of a big picture about standards-based grading and learning. This is from K2 to grade 12, we're a standards-based school. And why, this might feel a little bit different than when we went to school, where we just sort of generally learned maybe math, generally learned English, but not necessarily always clear about what our learning targets were. So standards allow us to have very clear learning targets. This is where we're working towards. It allows learning criteria to be clearly defined. Hopefully the word rubric is not a new word for you. A rubric is where we unpack a standard to clearly say, this is what it looks like to achieve this standard. This is what it actually looks like, and I'll show you in a minute here, what it means to exhibit depth within that rubric, or sorry, within that standard. And this is what it might look like to, you're approaching, you're not quite there. Standards allow us to give very clear, specific feedback, which is the topic of our conversation. And the other good important thing about standards, and you've noticed probably on a report card, is we report behaviors, okay? What are the things that help students learn, which are behaviorals, and the academics separately. They're very linked, right? But you will report it. So no longer will, back in the day, I know if I was late on an assignment, I'd be docked 10%, okay? My lateness on that assignment has nothing to do with my ability to achieve on that assignment. So now we communicate that separately. Yes, maybe I'm late and I need to work on my time management, but I actually really do understand those math concepts. So that's separate. Oh, thanks. Okay, so again, this is just some context to understand what learning looks like and how we design our curriculum everywhere in ASD. So you don't have to read all the words on here. This just shows you what an example of a standard looks like. Okay, a standard is written by very intelligent, smart people based in research who write standards that show progression. So this is an English language art standard about reading informational text, and you'll see we've highlighted the key words, how in grade 6, okay, a standard is about to, this specifically is determining a central idea and how it's conveyed, and you can see that throughout the grade, the complexity of that standard increases. Right, so in 6th grade ELA, this is really what students need to be able to demonstrate understanding on, and then it builds in 7th, 8th, 9th, 10.
So yeah, so kids will be doing similar things in each grade, and they may be like, oh, I already learned how to do this, but now we're learning how to do it in more depth or in different, adding layers onto it.
Yeah. So you as parents, and even students might not see that language, okay, but that's the language that teachers use to unpack, and we attach an achievement level to those standards. So I already mentioned this, right? A learner will provide sufficient evidence to demonstrate the targeted concept is when a student has achieved that. So a 3, right? So you see numbers on Power School. We'll show you a rubric. Rubric often uses words because we really want to emphasize the process of learning. The number doesn't give us a lot of information. The words help us actually make sense of that number. So a 3 means I've achieved that standard. I have met that target that has been identified to us in our curriculum, right? And every subject has a set of standards that we design learning around, okay? So this is sort of on the front page of your report card, which coincidentally I think is coming later this week, or is it next week?
I think it's Friday.
We just finished our quarter on Friday, so you'll get a progress report. It's very important that we talk about that as a progress, right? It's learning in process. So one last slide to just give some context. So
I can talk about this.
Yeah, so this is a rubric.
So here's an example of a rubric for middle school science. So you can see, like, this is what we're assessing, constructing explanations. And then each of these is like a little checklist. And so I talked to a whole bunch of kids at conferences about like how to level yourself up. One of the things that you can do is make sure you're reading the rubric so that you know what the expectations are. And, looking there to see what your next steps may be.
Yeah, So rubrics are a great avenue and a great tool, resource for parents and for students to really talk about their learning specifically, right? Because this unpacks exactly what the student needs to do to achieve that standard. And every assignment that your student will get and be working on will have a rubric attached. Any questions about that? That was sort of our standards-based Talk Tuesday in 3 slides. Normally we spend a little bit more time, but you've all been at ASD for a few years, so I think that's. We also wanted to just quickly highlight our attributes. Hopefully you have seen those around the school. Hopefully maybe you're starting to talk to your child about them, because we're also using our attributes to guide students in their learning. These are the things that we say at ASD we want our students to become. So at the end of their journey at ASD, there is evidence and students have had opportunities to demonstrate all 6 of these attributes. And this is becoming more and more important and more embedded into the learning your students are doing. And we'll talk about what that might look like from your end as a parent. But it was important for us to highlight because this is an important part of how we're talking about learning with our students in our classroom. And it's something that you could use in your class, because this gets away from, why don't you do your math homework, right? This helps you think about, maybe let's reflect on what's tricky about this math problem right now. What's some strategies that you've used in the past? We're jumping ahead. But this gives you different language that sometimes can separate from the emotions attached to singular subjects. All right. Still me, right?
Yep.
All right. So, student comes home, they're working on some stuff. You're not quite sure what it is. Maybe you've already established those routines where they work at the kitchen table, their laptop's up there, so you see them scrolling, but we're not quite sure what they're working on, and you want to start talking about that learning. Here's some things to think about. We're going to talk briefly about what feedback is and isn't. Some of this might be familiar, but it's really important to think about when we're talking to our kid about the learning progress, it is in feedback mode, right? To get them to talk about it, it's feedback. Important thing, and a lot of parenting books I've read reinforce this idea, is feedback is not praise. Just saying to someone, good job, or I'm so proud of you that you got a 4, that actually doesn't really do anything about their learning. And research is pretty clear on this. If a kid and if a student and an individual hears often, good job, good job, good job, they no longer have the motivation to work harder. And students tend to, and there is research that supports this, stop trying. The motivation is not there. They just expect that 4. They expect that good job every time, and when they don't hear that good job, they shut down. Right? So it's really important that feedback's not praise. Feedback is also not advice. All right? We've all probably been in situations where advice is one, optional. Hey, why don't you do that? And then it becomes more of a judgment. Right? Advice can sound like judgment. Advice can sound optional. And advice is often not invited. Right? What's the term about unsolicited advice? No one really loves unsolicited advice. So, why didn't you do your math homework? Or why didn't you do this example? I told you that this was a better source to use in your paper. That's not helpful, okay? And feedback's not evaluation, right? That number that they get in Power School, if it's not necessarily attached to words, that's not feedback. That doesn't give you anything. It tells you where you're at in a moment of time, or it tells you how you compare to others. And I'm sure those of you who have multiple kids, it's sometimes hard not to compare our children to each other. I have definitely been guilty of this, but that's not feedback, where they're having to compare themselves to someone else who's a completely different profile, completely different learner. And so that's not feedback. And we all tend to sometimes live this because this is a little bit easier, a little bit safer. We're more comfortable. We probably heard this. If I reflect on the things I heard from my parents, and this one still is probably the primarily feedback I get from my parents. So what is feedback? Feedback is very specific. Okay, and especially when you're middle schoolers, you'll notice this from elementary to middle school. Middle schoolers are working with a lot more complex assignments, right? Entire essays, entire projects. There's lots of pieces to the assignment, and it's hard to not want to say, oh, you didn't capitalize this, or you didn't get that problem correct, right? If they come home with a booklet of math problems, you want to give them lots and lots and lots of different feedback. What feedback is something that's really specific that they can act on at that moment, okay? So it's having to think, what's going to be the most impactful thing I can say right now to my child? So I noticed that you looked back at your teacher's feedback to improve your model and added more clear labels. That's actually technically praise. You're saying you're noticing something positives that your child did, but they can actually attach that praise to something and go, hey, maybe if I do more of that, I might even achieve even a stronger grade, which I'm going to put that in quotations, right? So you're being very specific. Very simple with my little kids, right? I have 2 boys, 3 and 5, and if they're building Lego, I have to really check myself, but hey, you really worked hard on that. I really liked how you built that tower, right? Like that minute. Okay. Feedback is something that feels safe and welcoming, and this is where that can be trickier at all age levels. I'm not going to say middle schooler because I'm dealing with this with my 5th grader, is if a student or if your child's receiving feedback when they feel frustrated or emotional or upset, nothing's getting passed. That is not a time to be giving feedback. So a helpful way to help your child feel safe is to name that emotion, right? And say you look frustrated with your homework, and maybe you can visualize what that looks like at the kitchen table, and they like slam their laptop, oh, I'm just not getting this, or I don't know what I'm doing, right? That's not the time to say, hey, let's take a look at it. Maybe it's the time to say, hey, that looks really tricky. Do you want to take a little break? And maybe we can sit down together. How about 10 minutes from now? But it has to be welcome because, again, we've all been on that receiving end when it's been unsolicited or we've had an emotional reaction, and our default is defensive. Our default is, I'm not interested in what you have to say. Another important part about feedback is it allows your child to be reflective. And we're actually going to talk a bit more about reflection. But if you pose a question to them where they have the power, right? It's less about you telling them what to do and more about you asking the right question that gets them unstuck, then that has the more power to be transferable and to be more impactful, right? So maybe they don't look so frustrated about their math that they slam their laptop, but they're in there and they're like, you can see the facial expression that it's getting a bit tricky for them. And I keep using that word tricky because it's a word that pops a lot up there. I don't know if you've noticed in parenting books. It's not necessarily hard, right? Because we want them to know it's tricks are things we can overcome. Sometimes when we say hard, it's like, I give up, I can't do it. I'm not that type of learner. What is tricky about this? Where can you go to get unstuck? What did you do in class today that was a tip on how to evaluate a source better? Right? What was the lesson that you did with your science teacher to think about the labels on their models?
Yeah, because I think as teachers, that's something we need to remember as well, because like as adults, we want to go in and we want to solve the problem and we want to help. And so we want to tell them what to do, because that's the easiest way to the end goal to get it done. But then you're doing all the heavy lifting mentally, and they're doing a lot less thinking than if you prompt them to try to figure out what they could do next.
Yeah, that's a good, and we talk about this as teachers as well. Who's doing the heavy lifting? Because whoever's doing the heavy lifting is doing the learning. So the people that you want to do the heavy lifting, the work, is your child. I think that's I have one more slide. All right, so this is probably, hopefully not a new concept about a growth mindset, but really helping our students, our children, to think about feedback with a growth mindset. I have a couple bubbles, if you don't mind. So reframe. Feedback is helpful. Feedback's not criticism, right? Just reframing. Hey, I'm giving you some feedback because it's helpful. I'm not criticizing you. Again, thinking about feedback and when was it helpful? When did you get a piece of feedback that was really helpful and you acted on it? Is there another one? I don't understand that yet. How many of you do you use that one? Right? I don't get it. And then just add the yet. I do that with I'm a 7th grade advisor, and often they're working on work in advisory, and they can get frustrated. That's the thing I hear the most. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't like it yet. The reframe. I think I have one more. Okay, so that's not right. You don't understand this yet. Again, that questioning. What strategies can you try to understand it better? Tons and tons of research about growth mindset. Actually, Steve, that's one of the books that you often talk about, right? Carol Dweck's.
It's the book I gave away the most in my career. Carol Dweck out of Stanford. And one of the unusual things is she's the researcher. That she actually wrote about the research in a way that a common person can understand it. So Carol Dweck, the book's called Mindset. It's not that big, it's easy. And it definitely, when I gave a copy to my mom, she said to me, "Are you giving this to me because I did it all wrong?" I said, "No, Mom." Growth mindset. It's really a great read for anyone who's parenting or your friends who are parenting. It's a great book.
Yeah, and yeah, so much research supports those students that do have a growth mindset are much more likely to be more successful, be able to bounce back from setbacks, developing that growth mindset. And again, it's hard because our intrinsic response is not to like, something tough happens, it's not to be like, oh, I wonder what I can learn from that. Or, oh, what can I do to help myself overcome that? Like, that is not our natural instinct to think in a growth mindset when something really hard's happening. So it really has to be taught. But the research in the book shows it can be taught. It is a teachable, actionable skill. And it's something, we'll get back to maybe we'll talk about the attributes again more, but definitely our attribute of self-awareness is about developing that growth mindset, right? How do I be aware of where I am right now, the emotional reaction I might be having to this feedback? Okay, take a step back. How can I reframe this? There's another book I'll mention at the end that has a really great, it's called Thanks for the Feedback, and it has a great chapter about how do we receive feedback. We talk about giving feedback, but sometimes we don't necessarily learn about how do I actually receive feedback appropriately. It's a really great book. Okay, I think I'm... All right, we've talked a lot. We're going to put you in a scenario. So I think do you need us to read this, or can you see it? Or is it too small? We're good? So read this scenario with someone next to you. How would you now, knowing what we've just talked about, how would you change that scenario? What would you say differently to help their child in this scenario?
I guess the parents aired their own frustrations rather than...
Yeah, the parents struggling to self-regulate themselves, right? And so we know if we're dysregulated, our child's more likely to be dysregulated.
Are we sure the parents here know the fractions?
Hey, that's a really great point, right? What do you do when your child is working on things that you yourself, and actually, hopefully a lot of the things you saw was not about you being an expert in that subject, right? So what would you do differently? If you didn't know fractions, what could you have said? What could the parent have said something different to Lily?
Maybe let's review it together and see, go over it, see if we can, understand it together.
So approach it collaboratively,
yes,
as a team.
but not refer it back to I've done this stuff in elementary. I don't think you can relate to your experience and push it onto the child.
Plus, who remembers what they did?
Exactly.
I know.
Not me,
The
so.
parent approach from the first question is totally
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah, there you go.
It's totally wrong. Everything the parent said, it's not really helping the child. So,
And even I like
the
the
first question, that's wrong, yeah.
the sign. Not again. So what could be the first thing you might enter that conversation with Lily?
What's holding you up? Do you need any help? Or
That's sometimes just that invitation just releases some of that emotion.
And yeah, and if she's confused and you, like we talked about, like don't actually remember, I'll do this with kids sometimes in advisory and they're working on homework. Let's go find a video or let's go find a website together where we can figure out how to approach this problem. And then I think that also makes them feel a little bit safe in the fact that they don't know what to do. Well, I don't know what to do either. So let's go figure it out together.
It's even when she said, I've done this in elementary, she would have said it the other way around, that it's been ages I didn't do that, and let's do it together so I can refresh maybe you can teach me,
Yeah.
So put yourself at the same level as your child, or like you need as well the help, and this is the way you enter and you just don't do it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, there's so many resources out there right now. And many of our teachers do share with you where you can go to get some extra support. And that is, we may not know the fractions, but we're adults. We can maybe pick it up a little bit quicker and be able to explain it once we watch a video together. Or we look at the lesson that was maybe done, and you could find on Schoology. We can help them model those skills of being a learner, less about being an expert in a subject area, but more about, okay, when I'm stuck, and I'm sure, even our own jobs, right, our own lives, we use other tools to help us solve our problems. Modeling that, I think, is really helpful. Any other thoughts about this scenario?
Can I ask another question? So this one is very clear. The parent is clearly probably tired, coming home from work, stressed, and not asking the right questions.
Yeah.
Let's say you're a little bit more understanding. They come home with a new methodology that they've implemented, and they're drawing out 54 circles to subtract out 32. And then there's like another one where they do horizontal math or whatever, so they're doing it, and then they do so many, and then the last one is where you expect them to do double-digit subtraction vertically. And they're very insistent on doing it a way ASD has taught them, and they're drawing 54 circles out. Like, how would you, like, this is like super obvious, right? In terms of maybe you could have worded it properly, but like, let's say in a more realistic scenario, where you're cognizant of the situation, you want to help them, but then, you know, the new way of teaching is not maybe in line with how we've been taught.
Did you go to the Open Up Talk Tuesday with Caitlin Fournier?
I did. I've been to the when they first explained it to us, which was, and then the more recent one.
Okay.
We're supposed to be working, and they have to be able to come up with different collaboration ideas and everything. But when you're at home, trying to get down dinner, bedtime, shower, and like math homework, and you know
all the things.
Yeah. So how do you, in like a more practical example, how would you guys handle that?
Any ideas?
That was what I was thinking, because often well not often, but sometimes I would say to my kid, why don't you just do it like this? And they would say, that's not how my teacher told me. And so I think it's important to make sure that you're in line, because I learned maths very, very differently from how my kids learned it at ASD, and what they learned was superior from what I learned, I feel. So making sure that I'm going back to the website or having a look at what's happening in the Schoology or the Seesaw or whatever it is. And if we just can't get it, saying try your best and let it go, and we'll come back to it. You can ask your teacher tomorrow, or advocating that they somehow write an email to their teacher or ask their teacher or say, I didn't get this yesterday, can you help me? So helping your child to advocate for themselves and asking is what I would.
I think there's also a place for saying, like, in math, for example, there are lots of different ways to solve problems. If you're having trouble with this way, this is the way I know.
Yeah.
Let's see which way works better for you.
The answer is no, that's not how we do it at school.
Is that your child saying that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not my taught.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's two things. I think that self-advocacy, right? If, and middle school specifically, we have a lot of structures in place to support students, right? Access is a great opportunity. Hopefully you know about the Learning Center at lunch, where there's someone always there to support child. So we have a lot of structures, and all of our teachers are always open to, like, before school, after school, lunch to help. So that self-advocacy piece. And then having that shared language, right? Like, yes, at ASD, and I'm familiar with, you open up and here's different strategies, but just to reiterate what you said is to say this is how I learned, this is what worked for me, but modeling our own growth mindset. Like, I do understand that there's new ways to learn, show me, help me understand, because this isn't the way that I learn. So activating our own growth mindset, I think is, but yeah, it is trickier, because when we were math minutes and the times tables, and I know math, I feel bad, we needed a math person here, math always gets the energy devoted to it. All right, thank you for that, but yes, trying to think about what helps in your realistic scenarios.
Great. So, and now we're going to talk a little bit about, like, learning that's been assessed. So, like, why should we talk about it? Like, a lot of research show that metacognition is really important and helps kids become, like, an expert learner. So all that thinking about thinking, helping them set goals, helping them monitor their progress with how they're doing, helping them, I've been talking to the kids about this in class, like, or at conferences. A really self-aware expert learner is able to tell what do they understand and what do they not understand, so that they can, figure out what goal they need to set and what steps they need to take to grow. And so it helps with the growth mindset that Rochelle talked about. It helps them build their self-awareness of their strengths and areas of growth. And it also helps, with possible self-doubt, because if we're not really sure, if kids are not really sure about, like, their ability to set goals and take next steps, then a lot of time that self-doubt can, like, get to them a lot easier, and then it makes them more likely to give up. Whereas if they have all these strategies and they're able to set goals and they have that self-awareness of how to figure out what to do next, then they don't have those same struggles with confidence when they come up against something difficult. So these are all the learning skills, like I was saying, that, these are what are going to make students expert learners. And, maybe they don't remember what photosynthesis is, but if they can remember, this is how I can set a goal and make sure I achieve it, these are the ways that I learn best, like, I mean, that's what's gonna help the kids be successful, no matter what they decide to do.
Sorry, just a quick
Mhm.
question on that. Is this something that's also sort of gone through with the kids? Like how?
We like in science class today, in 6th grade, the kids are all doing today and tomorrow are all doing a reflection. And so, they'll give back their summative, there's some feedback on it, they're gonna look at it and, talk about what did they do well, where could they have improved, and what are their next steps for next time. And then they'll do a unit reflection where they reflect on their strengths in the unit and how were they a communicator, which is one of our parts of the attributes. And then they'll pick a goal for the next unit. And I'll show this actually later in the slideshow, like a little planner for how to set a goal. And so, yeah, it is something that we're working on, and it's like a work in progress, but these are things that we talk about with kids. All right, so when to talk. It's really, like, it helps kids if it's more routine. So, schedule a time, create a routine about learning. Maybe, and some of you may already do this, like maybe you talk at dinner, maybe you talk in the car on the way home. At conferences, one of the parents was saying is that they have like a 6th grader and a 4th grader, and they play school on the weekends. And the kids teach their parents things that they're learning in school. And so, so they talk about it that way in like a more fun thing where the kids become the experts. And so really giving them options, like if you don't have a routine yet, what would you prefer? Would you rather talk at dinner? Would you rather, I don't know, every Tuesday after basketball practice, or, on Saturday mornings after we have breakfast, and giving them some choices and autonomy makes them feel a little more confident going into that discussion about their learning.
Does anyone do some of this already or have some tips on what works? I don't have that long of a commute, but it's amazing how much information I can get
Yeah, so the car ride
in
is
a
the
car.
best. I agree, yeah.
And now my son just sort of knows, like, this is what was really great about today, and I didn't really like this. Like I don't have to prompt him because that's perfect.
You're a captive audience, right?
Yes. And it can be a little less stressful for them because they're not like looking at you right in the face. They're sitting behind you in the car next to you. And it also makes it a little more comfortable, especially for some kids who might be more uncomfortable with like eye contact and things like that.
And even like that planning ahead. So okay, when we get home, what are going to be the first 3 things you're going to do, right? Or so they're already thinking ahead about setting up their own routines.
All right, and so we were talking about this. Yeah, what are we doing in our science? In our science reflections today, like, what did we do well? And it's always important to start with strengths because then we start from a place of confidence. Even if your kid, you're like, they had a math test and they got a 2 or they got a 1, it's still really important to talk about, what did you do well? And start from that point where like, you're not a horrible person, like, you're not stupid or whatever. Like you did something well, so let's start there. And then that gives them that little confidence to continue the conversation on to where you are then talking about next steps. And so someone was talking about this, they start talking about how was their day first. So start there, like model this. Can you start off the conversation? I was working on this, this report at work this week. Here's something I thought I did really well. I really showed that I was organized, because I had a deadline to meet, So like model that for the kids so they can see what it's like, and it again makes them more comfortable. And it really builds that sense of self-efficacy so that they know, even if they've made mistakes, they are doing things well. They have strengths. And then once you set the strengths and we know what we did well this week, and or what did you do well on your math test? Say the math test comes home. Show me a problem that you solved really well or a strategy that you used. Now you can talk about mistakes. Because it's really important for their growth mindset to understand it's okay to make mistakes. The whole point of making mistakes is that we then learn from them and we figure out what to do next. And again, you want to model that first. I messed up at work today because, I forgot about this meeting, or I said the wrong thing, or I was sharing a graph of our, sales this week and I messed up the formatting. And you got to be vulnerable with the kids. You've got to go first. We were talking about this in a teacher leader PD, and how the leader should always go first and make themselves vulnerable, because that makes everyone else feel safer. Because if they know that you're not perfect, then it makes them feel more comfortable to be not perfect. Especially for our little perfectionists, which some kids are. It also shows them that importance of recognizing when we make mistakes, and that it's good to talk about them so that we can move forward, that it's not something that we should just ignore, that it's a learning opportunity.
I just want to add something to this, just a little anecdote, because this gets embedded in kids really young. And so when my son was 4 last year, he had a situation where he made a mistake and had a really hard time responding to it. And a teacher spoke to him it's okay, we all make mistakes. My dad never makes mistakes. And he started talking about, well, when we draw, my dad never makes mistakes. When we build, everything's always perfect. The things we do with our kids, we've had to be really conscious to color outside the lines, have our tower knocked down. This gets so deeply embedded in kids at such a young age that we don't even notice that, right? We can draw obviously better than a 3 or 4-year-old. And so modeling that and sometimes, faking a mistake sometimes to talk about that and to show how you bounce back from that is a helpful strategy. So this hits home close, because we thought we were, spending time with our child and building with them and coloring and encouraging those skills, but he was internalizing it as he was comparing himself to us, which he can't do, right? We're very different. So that vulnerable part was really important.
Yeah, and we did that when we were talking about time management. We had some time management lessons in advisory the past few weeks. And when we started the conversation about what are some times that we didn't manage your time so well, we all made sure that we as teachers went first, to create that sense where no, we're not perfect, we make mistakes. And then once I did that, and I talked about the time that I got a B in one of my teaching classes because I turned my final project in late, then I started hearing from the kids, oh, here's when I did this and here's when I did this. And it made the whole environment a little safer to talk about, times we've messed up. And so this is what I was talking about. So, and then we want to set a goal. And so what's a goal you can set to help you grow? And again, you want to model that yourself. So we were talking about this in class, and I modeled for them. I think this is give an example from last year. I modeled for them last year. I was planning to run a half marathon. And so we went through my whole plan of what was I going to do, and what were the parts of my plan, and how was I going to know if I was doing well, and what would I do if I got stuck. And so it doesn't have to be a work thing. It could be a regular life thing. And really model for them that process of that we really have to think about the goal and what are the steps and what can we do. And you can even set goals and make people, share your own goal setting sheet, like I just said, and you could practice going through the goal setting activity together. So you ask them, I've shared my goal with you. Here's what I'm going to do. What's a goal you can set? Okay, well, let's work out the steps together. So on this one, we do something similar to this in 6th grade science. We set our goal, and then we talk about why we chose that goal. We pick a few steps, what are the steps that we have to take, so that we can break it down into pieces. Because they may set a goal I want to get a 4 on my next math test. And to them, they're well, then I'm just going to really study hard at the end. My goal is set. But that's not really, we all know that that's not super helpful, because they haven't actually decided what they're going to do. So, prompting them to stop and think, well, what are some of the things that you can do? I'm going to practice my Desmos. I'm going to, look up ask the teacher for some extra examples of this type of problem that I was having trouble with. Really specific little details. And I think they really need guidance with this, but this is super important. Having them have a plan for what they're going to do if they feel like quitting. The first time we did this, it's a work in progress in 6th grade, because they're well, I'll just keep trying. I won't give up. But honestly, that's not really that realistic, is it? So prompting them like, well, what if you do feel like giving up and you're frustrated and you hate it and you're really mad and you're upset? What are you gonna do? Like maybe it's they have a routine for how to calm down. Maybe it's they're gonna book access with the teacher. Maybe it's they're gonna, have a chat with you after school, so that you can help them problem solve. Like really specific stuff, because if you don't teach them how to really be thoughtful about it, it's just super surface level, and then you kind of just wasted your time, and it's not as helpful as it really could be. And we talked about how will we check our progress as we work towards the goal. So I'll look at my Desmo scores. I'll keep track of how many times I had to say it's a math, like their math, they want to get a 4 on their next math test. How will I'll check how many times I had to fix a problem when I'm doing my math homework. So what are they going to do to track their progress? And then, some other things that you might think about, like what might be difficult for me, what do they need to get started? Who are they going to ask for help if they need it? So really break it down into all these little pieces to make it manageable, to help them figure out the specific steps and help them know what to do when they struggle. And if they do all this pre-planning, or at least even some of it, maybe you don't do all of those things, but you do, the steps and what they'll do if they feel like quitting and how they'll check their progress, then they have a plan and it's outlined, and they have some specifics, to lean to as they figure out next steps. And when they get to the point where, they do get frustrated, because we all will at some point. I think goal setting is super helpful so we can figure out how we can grow.
And definitely things, a lot of things we're talking about, we never were intentionally taught. And we've had to try and figure out some of these things that help us be successful people. And so we are doing a lot of these things in class, but to be able to transfer that into the class, in your house as well, it's gonna set up our kids so much successfully. All right,
so we've got another little turn and talk about, so we got a grade back. Obviously this is not the best example of a conversation. We've got a parent, putting their own emotions into the conversation again. But we'll give you a moment to read it over, and then we can have a little chat about what could we do differently to help our kid reflect on the grade that they got. Or reflect on how their assessment went, I should say. The grade is not the important thing, the learning is. So does anybody have any thoughts about how the parent could have talked to Avery a bit differently?
Is
familiar?
that the same parents?
Maybe a different child. That word effort, again, we all get caught up on that. If you just put more effort in. But a lot of what we're trying is what does that actually mean, right? Your effort and my effort could look completely different.
And it sticks with you, because I can still remember, I was just very good at school, good at tests, good at all that kind of stuff. And my older sister really struggled. And I remember my mom, I still remember, this is 30 years later, and my mom was like, but your grades mean more because you had to try harder than Rachel. And so someone impinging on how much effort you gave, I still remember it 25, 30 years later. So the things we say, I think we all know, mean a lot more than to our kids than we might think.
Where the kid said, I just got mixed up a little, you can take it in a different way and say, what got you mixed up, and what did you learn from that, and constructive feedback kind of in terms of to keep trying and not put them down, not an easy part, or not scoring more. It's great what you did, but reflect on why you got mixed up so it doesn't happen again, maybe.
Exactly,
Or it's a new learning.
Asking those questions, and you naturally started asking questions that would help them set a goal, right? What did you mess up this time, and what could you do next time to not make that mistake? Any other thoughts on this scenario? Yeah, just be thoughtful about our words, right? We talked about the word effort. If you just focused a little bit more, did we ever get taught of what it means to pay attention? What does that even mean, right? talking through what does it mean to focus a little bit more, being specific, going back to that earlier slide, right? What does that actually mean? If we don't know what that means, talk together. Like, hey, let's come up with a plan. What would it look like for you to focus? We actually just did a lesson last week in advisory, or what was that name of that strategy? I'm not going to remember now. But basically, we just talked about a strategy. You set a timer for 25 minutes.
Oh, Pomodoro method, yeah.
25 minutes, and then take a 5-minute break, go for a little walk, grab a snack, right? Like maybe it's not 25 minutes. Maybe it's 7 minutes of focus, right? Focus or prioritizing that time. Any other thoughts on this? Do you want to add any more to that? No? Okay. We'll give that one more.
Yeah, so there's some great times to talk to your kid about their learning. So this has not happened yet, but it is going to be coming soon. So as you know, like last year we started putting in the teacher and student comments on some of their assessments, but then you have to go look and check and see which ones have comments, what grades have appeared. And so we're going to start sending out a monthly Power School email that will have any comments that have been written about any of your kids' assignments. So it'll have like the class and the name of the assignment and the comment that the teacher or the student, sometimes there's student comments made, as well as any missing assignments. So that monthly Power School email is going to be a great opportunity to have a little chat about how things are going.
Just to add to that, Mr. Mike will be sending lots of information about what that looks like, what to expect. I think it's already been mentioned. Yes. In that, yes, he did. So we did ask him if it's okay if we mention it because he's already started talking a bit about that. But it's going to be a really great talking point. Do you want me to talk about this?
You can talk about student-led conferences.
So student-led conferences. If you were in middle school last year, we had student-led conferences last year, and obviously if you're an elementary parent, you are very familiar with student-led conferences. This is a great time. Well, we create the time for you to talk about learning with your child in a structured way. So you'll have opportunities to, similar to what you did in last week, you'll go to each of your child's classes, but really it's you and your child being driven about the learning that they did in class with some prompts from the teacher and with some evidence of learning through the whole year to see their growth. And it's a really great opportunity. They'll be able to talk about the goals that they've set. You might be able to set some goals together. So putting the students, and hopefully you notice throughout this whole presentation, it's really about positioning the student to talk about their learning and to be reflective and to set goals and to really put the ownership on them in a safe, supportive, learning way, right? We're not just saying, go do this. It's here's all these structures, here's all these tools, here's all the things we can do to support you, and now we put you in that driving seat. So student-led conferences is all about that. We'll have another Talk Tuesday actually all about student-led conferences. I think last year there may have been some, maybe some misunderstanding or misalignment of what our goals are. So we will have a whole separate Talk Tuesday about really how to get the most out of student-led conferences. And so those are happening April 30th, May 1st.
And then just like we said, anytime, in the car, at dinner, on Saturdays if you're playing school, like that one kid in my 6th grade science class. It's like whatever works best for you and your kids.
One more. Any other times that are good? Report card time, yes or no, right? Or progress report time. That again, finding the right time for that. It might not be as soon as it pops up into your email, depending on the emotion attached to it. It might be, hey, we just got your progress report. Do you want to go for breakfast on Sunday and chat a little bit about what's going really well this first quarter in 7th grade? Right? That's maybe you have a little enticement. We all like to talk around food, right? Hey, let's grab some ice cream and let's celebrate the great learning you've done this first quarter of middle school. All right, in our closing, what's something you might apply today with your interactions with your child? What's something that you might be taking away with you today?
I really like the goal-setting worksheet because I think sometimes when we're having conversations, you don't go into the depth of that. And, actually having something, a visual, written document that you can almost refer, if you get stuck, go back and look at what you wrote down. I think that would be something great too. So I'm going to try and make a copy of that.
Awesome. Anybody else?
The whole presentation was full of really useful tips, so really very helpful, but just to be devil's advocate.
Yeah, sure.
I feel like in this, especially nowadays, we're just like tiptoeing around our children's emotions. And, you know, don't we want to teach these kids to be a bit resilient? I mean, don't they need to be told off sometimes? Don't we just need, why do we have to say, hey, can we talk about what's positive about your report card on Saturday? Like, do we need to be so gentle in approaching them? I mean, they are going to go to the real world at some point. And so, I don't know, I mean, just to be devil's advocate, I mean, I do see your point, of course, but.
So resilient is one of our attributes, for sure. We want students to be able to rebound. Also, if I'm gonna get maybe negative feedback from my boss, I'm sure they're not gonna be like, hey, sit down. It's like, hey, like, let's chat about this. How can we learn from this? So
Yeah.
I see your point, and I would say maybe I wouldn't necessarily have seen that as tiptoeing around emotion. It's maybe having a more compassionate approach, and still addressing it.
Yeah.
That's my initial response.
Yeah.
And then also, like, natural consequences. Like, hey, like, there are natural consequences that students will face, and I don't think any of us are saying we don't want our children to face natural consequences. We want to give them some tools and some things that maybe we struggled with that we don't need to struggle with.
Yeah.
And then there's a point where there's a choice in which you take and apply that. I don't
Yeah,
know. There's
and
thoughts.
I mean,
I actually want to open that up. That's a
It's
great.
not like, we're not saying like don't, like say someone does get all 1s and 2s, obviously you need to have a tough conversation and that's totally understandable and there are probably going to be consequences about it. Just maybe I've been thinking a lot with the kids in class about letting them know not why we're doing those things and like, you know, like we keep a notebook in class and there's page numbers and like, it's not because I, you know, don't want you to use your phone, it's because you need to realize that your phone is distracting you when you're not doing your studying. So I think as long as we're giving that justification for the consequences we're giving, so hopefully they understand what they're supposed to be learning from it.
And one of the things, and this is more of a parenting thing, but we talk about it in class as well, like if you don't do this, hey, what would be a consequence? Like, hey, first quarter, maybe it was a bit of a tough transition. What would happen if this still looks the same at semester? Hey, maybe we don't use your phone during the week. Yeah. So still embedding those consequences, naming the why, and maybe having them involved in what would, I mean, kids are pretty honest. Like they'll be even hard on themselves. Like, okay, if this happens, fine, I can't go to my friend's birthday party, or yeah, you know what, because ultimately we want them to get to the point where they are self-aware. Technology is the thing, right? Like that was one of my conferences last week was, how can I get my child to not just switch screens while they're doing their homework? And so they knew, like, okay, yeah, I need to put my phone away. Yeah, my laptop, I need to take away all these games. They know, and they just need some support and being aware of those consequences. So, yes, it's that balance, right? I do think it's, in some ways, it's tipped in areas where it is too like cushiony, right? No one can lose, no one can fail. That's not what we want. Failing is important. Like if we don't fail, then that's where my child thinks, like his dad's perfect. There are people that don't fail. No, we all fail. We all make mistakes. It's how we rebel. All right.
Question on, do you have any tips on how to get through all of this with a child that's not necessarily a communicator and sort of struggles with reflect? I have 3 kids and they're all very different, but one in particular is quiet. And how did it go? Fine. How do you think, how did you do on this assignment, homework, summative, whatever? Fine. Okay, but I see you got it to, what do you think you could do? What do you think you did great? What, so I do put in those strategies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like, is there anything more targeted to really?
Or more the, maybe
Be like
introverted, quieter.
Exactly.
I'm trying to think, because I was definitely very introverted as a kid. But I don't know, do you have any ideas? Like if they're not responding to those prompts? Because I mean, it sounds like you're doing everything that you should, to try to probe deeper.
My oldest was like that. He turned out okay.
There we go.
He's fine.
Don't worry so much about, he didn't talk at all. In fact, I was asked to look into early intervention for him. and he's in one of the top engineering schools. So I think it just depends on your kid, right? All the things I used to worry about, I look back and I'm like, God, you should just let it go. And you made a good point about being firm with your kids, having consequences. I think it's super important to have that. So that's like, if your kid wants to talk to you, they will. And don't be so hard on yourself.
But also keep asking, right? Like,
Yeah.
Absolutely,
I think
yeah.
that's the important thing.
Absolutely, I agree.
Not pestering, but
Yeah,
asking,
yeah.
and they know you care, and they know
Yeah.
you're here, and at some point, someone's gonna connect, and yeah, in middle school, I mean, everybody's going through so much, right? So I think, like you were saying, with time, it will change, but I think, yeah, that's the important thing, is to continue to ask and take them where they're at.
And just so you know, that same kid talks to me more now that he's in college than he did throughout high school. He didn't know what was going on really, so, yeah.
So, and also, I've got one that's very, very quiet as well, so she didn't talk a lot, and she does now in college. But one thing that I found was, sometimes when it was on my time, they found it difficult to talk, so I would say, when would be a good time for you to talk? Is it like later today or tomorrow? Like giving them options about when they would talk. And often it was at 10:30 at night.
Yes.
Yeah, but I went into because
When you're asleep.
There's psychology behind that,
Yeah.
right? Because they know it's their time.
Yeah, so, but doing it
It's the
on
most
their
popular time
time
for
was,
teens to
yeah.
talk.
And I would have to stay awake and at 11:30 at night, say, I have to go to bed, I've got to get up and work in the morning, but making sure I was, yeah, giving them on their terms.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good luck.